Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, which is womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 37,685 people from 160 countries and is supported by 518 organisations, or a bit more because we haven't updated it recently. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, engaged in defending women's rights. So do join us if you can. You can become a member of WDI by donating or volunteering, or just volunteer or donate, and you can get in touch. And it is a women-only organisation, so it's only for women to be volunteers or actually to be activists. Now, today's webinar is, we have a focus on the United Nations, but also on other international institutions like the EU. Now, what's going on with gender identity ideology at that level, at the international level? We are really lucky today to have Maureen O'Hara from the UK. She's going to talk about how the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights relates to the UN and other factors to do with CEDAW, the Commission, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and relation to the United Nations. Then we're going to have Amparo Domingo, who is going to talk about what is SOGI or SOGI, and who is the new Council of Europe Commissioner. So that will be a focus on those aspects. We're then going to hear from Dansky, who is going to talk about the Special Rapporteur, Alsalem's criticisms of the Biden administration's efforts to redefine sex out of existence under Title IX. So Alsalem is a UN Special Rapporteur, so that's how that links up, and that will help us understand how the UN speakers or position holders can influence countries and why it's an important place to try to lobby or try to influence. And then we're going to have Bernadette Malley, who's going to give us some news from the NGO CSW. So that's the Commission on the Status of Women, and the NGO are the sort of side events going on around it. And they are very important because they're the way that the UN spreads news globally via those network of grassroots NGO organisations, and also possibly gets news in. I'm really pleased to hand over now to our first speaker, who is Maureen O'Hara. Maureen O'Hara is a radical feminist, legal, academic, and former practicing lawyer. Since late 1970s, she's been active in many feminist campaigns opposing sex-based violence, particularly in relation to the sex trade and sexual abuse of children. In recent years, Maureen's campaigning has been focusing on promoting women's sex-based rights and challenging gender identity ideology. She's co-author of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights and a member of WDI International and of WDI UK. Over to you for your talk. Oh, sorry, and your talk is titled How the Declaration Relates to the UN, but I think you might modify that to make it more accurate. So over to you, Maureen.
So I'm going to talk about, thanks Bernadette, the Declaration, and the main purpose of it was to reaffirm the rights set out for women under the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW, and the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And we did draw on some other UN human rights instruments as well, but it was mainly those two that we had in mind when we developed the Declaration. Both of those instruments are based on the idea that women's oppression is based on our experiences as a sex. They don't talk about gender identity. They didn't have gender identity in mind when they were written. And it's very clear from the content that what they had in mind was women who are born women, who are biologically female. And one of the reasons why we decided to write the Declaration was because increasingly, because lobbying by gender identity ideology lobby groups, more and more people were talking about these human rights provisions as if they included men who claim a female gender identity. And we wanted to challenge that. Now, there are, within the UN and within groups who have links to the UN, there are women, I think, who broadly agree with us, and there are women who are very much opposed to what we're saying, as what Joe said illustrated that, banning us from forums. There are some women who support us as well. And so there's a lot of different approaches. And a good illustration, I think, of what is happening in the UN and what has been happening over recent years is that last year, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Alsalem, wrote a letter in response to the Scottish Government's attempts to introduce gender self-ID in Scotland, which in the end didn't come to fruition for various reasons. But while they were trying to introduce that, she wrote a letter in support of single-sex spaces and services for women. And she got a lot of comeback because of writing that letter, including a letter from a number of different women's organisations and organisations who would see themselves as LGBTQ organisations as well, criticising her very strongly for defending women's sex-based rights in that way. And they say in their letter, "We strongly hope you will reconsider your position and uphold established human rights standards regarding legal gender recognition and gender identity throughout your work." And this idea that these are established human rights standards which recognise gender identity has been increasingly introduced into various forums relating to the UN and more widely than that as well. It's been introduced into the EU. But there isn't really a strong foundation in any of the human rights instruments for saying that. In fact, there's no real foundation in the CEDAW or the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which are the key instruments relating to the rights of women that the UN produced. But nevertheless, that idea is being pushed. And one of the things we wanted to do in writing the declaration was to challenge that. This is the CEDAW definition of discrimination under Article 1, which says that for the purposes of the present convention, the term discrimination against women shall mean any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status, on a basis of equality of men and women, of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. And it goes on to discuss women's rights in a range of different fields. And it's very clear, it says on the basis of sex. And the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, this is really the core of why they established that declaration. They recognise that violence against women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between men and women, which have led to domination over and discrimination against women by men and to the prevention of the full advancement of women. And that violence against women is one of the crucial social mechanisms by which women are forced into a subordinate position compared with men. Violence against women is widespread throughout the world. It's probably one of the most common, if not the most common type of human rights abuse on the planet. It exists everywhere. And we see, and I think many feminists see, that when men are allowed in law and policy to start defining themselves as women and being treated as if they're women, particularly if they're treated as if they're women in law, that undermines our attempts to challenge and fight back against male violence against women. Men who identify as women are often as violent towards women. They have a high proportion of them are sex offenders, or certainly a high proportion of trans-identifying males in the prison system in England and Wales and in other jurisdictions have convictions for sexual offences. So the fact that they identify as women doesn't stop them from perpetrating sexual violence or any other type of violence against women. Their rates of violence are probably as high, if not in some instances higher, than those of other men. Now, both the CEDAW and the Elimination of Violence Against Women Declaration emphasise at various points in their wording the importance, in order to achieve the rights and the protections for women that they're aiming for, of challenging stereotyped roles for men and women, of challenging sexual stereotypes. It's mentioned in both of them, and in the CEDAW, it's mentioned several times. And Article 5 of the CEDAW says that the states who are party to it should take all appropriate measures to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women, with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and customary and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes or on stereotyped roles for men and women. What they're really talking about here is gender, as we would understand it, which is culturally created sex roles for men and women within which women are given a subordinated role. That is what historically, when feminists have talked about gender, that's what we meant. Now men are saying that they have a female gender identity, and they're basing that on stereotyped ideas about what women and men are. Again, under Article 10, I won't read it all out, but it talks about the elimination of any stereotyped concept of the roles of men and women at all levels and in all forms of education. And the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women talks about states adopting all appropriate measures, especially in the field of education, to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women and to eliminate prejudices, customary practices, and all other practices based on the idea of the inferiority or superiority of either of the sexes and on stereotyped roles for men and women. It's fundamental to both of these human rights instruments that women's oppression and their subordination to men is very closely tied to stereotypes about what men and women are and how men and women should behave. And what men who claim to have a female gender identity are doing is effectively turning those stereotypes into an identity. It's very clear from the way that they behave and the way that they dress that they have a concept of women which is based on sexual stereotyping. What many of them are doing is turning that sexual stereotyping into a fetish if they're autogynephiles, and many of them they have a sexual fetish which involves being sexually attracted to themselves in the role of a woman. And their idea of what the role of a woman is based on stereotypes. And for many of them, the foundation of their ideas about what a woman is rooted in pornography. We know that. There's a lot of evidence to show that that's the case. So men claiming a female gender identity is fundamentally opposed. It fundamentally contradicts the ideas in the CEDAW and in the UN elimination, the Violence Against Women Declaration, it undermines the protections that those two human rights instruments advocate for women and the safeguards, and it undermines the rights of women. Because it's actually turning stereotyped ideas about what men and women are into an identity and demanding that the identity is recognised in law, in social policy, and so on. So one of our key aims in developing the declaration was to challenge that and say women's rights under these two instruments are based on our experiences as a sex. They have nothing to do with gender identity, and men who claim a female gender identity should not be seen as being included within the provisions that those two human rights instruments have set out. Those instruments are to protect women and to further our rights. They're not designed to protect the rights, or more probably accurately, the entitlements of men who claim to be women. We looked at the various UN human rights provisions that specifically relate to women. We also looked at the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as well. That's another one that we drew on in relation to the article in the Declaration which talks about children. As I've just said, our view is that the idea that men can have a female gender identity fundamentally is based on sexual stereotypes and challenges the rights set out in CEDAW and in the Violence Declaration. So the Declaration has 9 articles which deal with the areas in which the acceptance of gender identity, whether that's in law or in policy or in practice, most negatively affects women's ability to exercise the rights and protections which the CEDAW and the Violence Declaration were intended to create. We think it undermines them. So these are the 9 articles of the Declaration, which most of you are probably familiar with. The first one, which is the foundation for all of them, is that women's rights are based on our experiences as a sex. And women in law should be defined on the basis of sex and not gender identity. Similarly, in policy and in social practice, that men should not be seen as being women in any sense of the word, that being a woman is based on having a female biology, and that the law and policy should reflect that. Secondly, that motherhood is an exclusively female status. And the idea behind that was to challenge the increasing claims that men are making that they are the mothers of their children, which is detrimental to children. It undermines, I think, children's sense of reality for a man to be telling them, I'm your mother. It is detrimental to women, and particularly women who are mothers. Being a mother and going through pregnancy is an exclusively female experience, which men cannot participate in. And it undermines women's rights, and particularly women's rights in the context of maternity, for men to claim that they can participate in it. And now increasingly, they are wanting to not only call themselves mothers, but to simulate breastfeeding. And parts of the medical profession are helping them by developing them to have a substance which is induced by hormones in their bodies through which they can simulate breastfeeding a child. We don't know enough about what effect that will have on those children, because that substance is hormone induced. But that's what they're doing. They're claiming that they can breastfeed, and they're claiming that the substance that is being produced by these hormones is as good as breast milk. That undermines, again, the status of motherhood. It's detrimental to women. It's detrimental to the real mothers of those children, and it's detrimental to women as a whole, because motherhood is an exclusively female experience in which men can't share. They can pretend to share, they can LARP as being mothers, but they're not. And it's detrimental both to women and to children, in our view, if the state in law or in policy accepts that pretense on the part of men. Physical and reproductive integrity is the third article, which is opposed to surrogacy, and also opposed to any medical research which aims to enable men eventually to become pregnant and give birth. And there is research which is looking at that. I doubt whether it will ever come to any fruition, because I can't see how that could work physically. But we would like that kind of research stopped, and we would like the kind of practices that are involved in men simulating breastfeeding also to be stopped, and that the medical profession to stop pandering to those men's fantasies by enabling them to emulate breastfeeding and doing research that's aimed at enabling them eventually to give birth. Freedom of opinion and expression is Article 4. We were very conscious at the time we were writing the Declaration that women's defence of sex-based rights was being met with attempts to silence us, that women were being bullied, that they were losing their jobs because they defended sex-based rights and said that men can't be women. So that's a very important aspect of the fight back against gender identity ideology. Number 5, peaceful assembly and association. It's absolutely crucial that we can meet as women without men who claim to have a female gender identity having to be included because the law says they have to be included, which in some jurisdictions is happening now. In parts of Australia, as I understand it, lesbians can't meet, can't arrange public meetings just for lesbians. Men who claim to be women and to be lesbians in law have to be included. So gender identity ideology is intruding on our rights to women-only space and women-only assembly and association. And in the long run, if that continues to happen, that will have a really detrimental effect on the women's movement and our ability to challenge women's oppression and to meet, to plan and strategize against male dominance, because it's going to become increasingly difficult to keep men out of those meetings if they claim that they're women. Similarly, number 6 is political participation. And one of the things we had in mind there was men claiming to be women taking up places which were supposedly allocated to women to increase political participation for women. So all women shortlists for to take up political positions, for example. Men claiming to be women were being put on those all women shortlists. And that's something we want to stop. Participation in sports and physical education. We all know that men are now starting to play in women's sports. Women are being physically injured in some cases as a result of that. And the men involved, because of the nature of male puberty and the additional strength and speed it gives, they're taking prizes that women should be getting. In the US, where gaining certain sporting prizes can give someone a free education, which they couldn't otherwise have at university, men are taking that. So we wanted to challenge that. Number 8 is the elimination of violence against women. And as I've already mentioned, if we accept that men can claim to be women, it makes it much more difficult to challenge male violence against women. Well, partly because one of the things that we need to do is to be able to correctly identify in statistics and other data who is committing sexual offences and violent offences and who are the main people on the receiving end of that. Overwhelmingly, sexual and violent offences of all kinds are committed by males. And the majority of those who experience sexual violence are women and girls. And if men start claiming a female gender identity and claiming that they're women, that complicates and makes it very difficult to challenge that. And it also makes women vulnerable to being abused by males who claim to be women in single-sex spaces, and in particular prisons. And then 9 is the protection of the rights of the child, which talks about the use of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries with minors as being a form of abuse. In fact, we described it as a new and developing cultural practice which is damaging to children. And we drew on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which emphasises only doing what's in the child's best interests, to argue that it is not in children's best interests to have their bodies permanently altered at a young age where they can't possibly give valid consent to what is being done to them. So just as an example of what we did when we were developing the declaration and how we drew on the human rights instruments, I'll talk a little bit about the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and what we said about some of the articles in there in the declaration. So this is Article 4G of the UN Declaration, which says that states should work to ensure to the maximum extent feasible in the light of their available resources and where needed within the framework of international cooperation, that women subjected to violence and where appropriate their children have specialised assistance such as rehabilitation, assistance in childcare and maintenance, treatment, counselling and health and social services, facilities and programmes, as well as support structures, and should take all other appropriate measures to promote their safety and physical and psychological rehabilitation. It doesn't say specifically that those spaces and services should be single sex, but it's well established amongst organisations who work with women who are survivors of domestic abuse, of sexual violence and other forms of male violence, as well as those who work with girls, that those spaces and services work best for women when they're single-sex services. So therefore, we said in Article 8 of the Declaration that these measures should include the provision of single-sex services and physical spaces for women and girls to provide them with safety, privacy and dignity, whether provided by public or private entities. Such single-sex provision should be allocated on the basis of sex and not gender identity, and should be staffed by women on the basis of their sex and not gender identity. And as many people here will know, domestic abuse refuges, rape crisis centres, a whole range of different services and spaces that was set up during the second wave of feminism, largely. That's when they began. And what women were set up by women, for women, and staffed by women only. Increasingly, not all of them, but many of them, are providing services to men who claim to be women and are even employing men who claim to be women, as refuge workers, as rape crisis advisors, and so on. And that's one of the things we wanted to stop. In Article 4K of the Violence Declaration, it talks about the importance of data on violence against women, the importance of collecting that in order to work out strategies for challenging it, because you need to know the patterns it takes before you challenge it. And Article 4K says promote research, collect data and compile statistics, especially concerning domestic violence, relating to the prevalence of different forms of violence against women, and encourage research on the causes, nature, seriousness and consequences of violence against women, and on the effectiveness of measures implemented to prevent and redress violence against women. Those statistics and finding of the research will be made public. You can't do that if you're categorizing males as female in criminal justice data, for example. If you do, it completely skews the data. It can make it look as if women are committing all sorts of offences that by and large women don't commit, and they're offences that are almost universally committed by men, and that's starting to happen. So we said that this should include recognition that accurate research and data collection relating to violence against women and girls requires that the identification of both the perpetrators and the victims of such violence must be based on sex and not gender identity. And that's crucially important to challenging violence against women for a whole range of reasons. And another article in the Violence Declaration relates to women's access to justice. That's Article 4D says that states should develop penal, civil, labour and administrative sanctions in domestic legislation to punish and redress the wrongs caused to women who are subjected to violence. Women who are subjected to violence should be provided with access to the mechanisms of justice and, as provided for by national legislation, to just and effective remedies for the harm they've suffered. States should also inform women of their rights in seeking redress through such mechanisms. Now, this is being undermined by laws and policies which allow men to claim to be female, including men who are charged with sexual offences against women. And that is increasingly happening in many jurisdictions. It's happening in the UK, but it's happening in many other jurisdictions worldwide. We said that this should include the recognition of the rights of women and girls to accurately describe the sex of those who have perpetrated violence against them. Public bodies such as the police, state prosecutors and the courts should not impose an obligation on victims of violence to describe their assailants according to their gender identity rather than their sex. And there have been instances in different parts of the world where women have been reprimanded for calling men who've assaulted them he in court, where they've been told call the defendant she, which is detrimental to women's ability to give their evidence about their experiences of sexual violence, which is a very difficult thing to do anyway in a courtroom. And insisting that women call men she when they're giving evidence about those men's violence against them undermines women's access to justice and gives defence lawyers a lot of leeway as well for playing games when women are giving their evidence in order to undermine them. Which is one of the key strategies of cross-examination. The purpose of cross-examination is to undermine the witness's testimony. And there's lots of strategies that lawyers who carry out cross-examination use to try to do that. And the ability to play linguistic games about whether a woman should call a man she or he adds to their arsenal of techniques that they can use. And it undermines women's evidence. So in regard to criminal justice, the Declaration reaffirms the rights of women to describe their men who assault them accurately as men. And also in regard to what we said about single-sex services under Article 8, we've emphasised that men should not be treated as if they're women, and that has a significant impact in lots of different areas of criminal justice, including prisons, where in the UK, some trans-identified males are placed in women's prisons, but now they're not. Usually, with some exceptions, if they've committed violent or sexual offences against women. That's the case in England and Wales anyway. But there are jurisdictions where men who are convicted rapists are placed in women's prisons and even in women's cells, and where women have been assaulted by those men, and where there's an atmosphere that's created which makes it very difficult for women to report those men for their violence and threats of violence. And the placement of men in women's prisons undermines women's safety, but it also undermines women's privacy and women's dignity. And that is one of the results that takes place where states recognise in law that men can become women. Now, some states put some controls on that aspect of it and some don't. But it's the logical conclusion of recognising men as having female gender identities, that they can be placed in women's prisons, even if they've committed rape against women, if people are going along with the pretense that they're women and describing in court, using terms like her penis, which does happen. So that's another aspect of criminal justice, and in relation to violence against women, that the Declaration opposes. Thank you.
We're going to get Sharon Byrne, who is at the CSW, and she is the executive director of WOLF, the Women's Liberation Front, and she's also in this webinar today. So we thought it would be great to get Sharon on. So if we could get you on, Sharon, just can you? It's great you're here and that you're there in New York at the CSW. Can you tell us why you're there and what's going on there? Is there any news?
Oh yeah, a lot of news. First of all, great discussion this morning. Very happy to be part of it. Yeah, so I'll be in New York through Tuesday. Yeah, hi, Allie. Yeah, Wolf is in the house. So we did a presentation on Thursday as part of the NGO CSW. So Joe, you brought this up, and we should reiterate to every woman on this call, you can sit in on all the sessions next week that the NGO is putting on, non-governing orgs that are part of CSW. I got appointed as a delegate through an organization, which is the United Nations Association of America. So that's how I've become a delegate to CSW, and this is my 4th year attending. And it is very, very interesting. So we had a great conversation with Reem Alsalem earlier this week. She, on Wednesday, was being acknowledged with the 30-year anniversary of the creation of the mandate for the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women. Reem is the one who added "and girls" to that mandate. So she's 2 years into her mandate, and they had all 5 of the previous mandate holders there. That was a great conversation. Something that had kind of not crystallized for me, but did in that conversation, was that really the 1990s was some sort of zenith for women's rights. Now, those of us that were women in the workplace in the 1990s didn't think it was all that great, but apparently that was like the zenith sort of women's rights, and it has really gone into such decline. And obviously the backtracking and the pushback is really bad. So the presentation that we gave on Thursday as part of the NGO organizations was to talk about how we feel like women's equality cannot be achieved while commercial sexual exploitation exists. It's just, as much as everybody wants to kind of turn a blind eye to porn, turn a blind eye to surrogacy, like, oh, well, there's needs for, no, this is what keeps us from attaining full equality. Last year at the opening of the CSW conference, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said at the present pace, it would take 300 years to achieve full legal equality for women. And who could wait this long, right? Who could wait this long? This year in his opening kickoff speech, he said that grandmothers and mothers, and I'm one of them, are afraid that our granddaughters will have less rights than we do presently, even today, and as fast as they're backtracking. He talked about the rise of, extremism around the world and the backlash and how that is hurting women's rights. I would say in the UK, you've been so fierce, and I've got a British mum turf, so you've been so fierce at pushing back, on some of this. In the US, a little behind you, but we're also getting assaulted from the left and the right in the United States, and it is as bad as gender ideology is, and it's so bad, the erasure is really bad, which puts you on the road to what is happening to the women in Afghanistan, who roundly disputed the term gender apartheid and instead went for the real term gender erasure, right? That they're being absolutely erased from public life. You also see from the American right, and this was discussed some in the Conference on the Status of Women, Project 2025, and the way that they are planning for a conservative administration in 2025. And they are already starting now, passing laws to surveil women, to ban contraception, you name it, right? So we are like, in the United States, we are getting it from the left and the right. We are in no woman's land. There's no quarter here. So,
can I just ask one question, just to, and then we'll have to go carry on with the webinar. But it's absolutely brilliant to hear from you. What about the gender identity ideology? Is that being brought up? Are people talking about it?
No,
and what do you think the mood is?
So, Joe, I got to tell you, one of the things Reem told us, which I really appreciated, is that she considers gender ideology a new form of patriarchy, and we agree that it's a new and improved sparkly patriarchy, right, with rainbows, but that it is being pushed in the UN by the member states. And of course, mine would be foremost amongst them. I will tell you who's really pushing it here is Canada. Canada is pushing it very, very hard. I've only seen one guy here trying to pass himself off as a woman. Of course, he was from the Canadian delegation. It's really not coming up that much in topic material, I got to tell you, because what is the topic material? Let's end female genital mutilation. Let's end commercial sexual. The theme this year is poverty. So this is all aimed at how do you raise women up out of poverty? What are the financing mechanisms? So obviously, the Republic of Togo, gender ideology is not a big thing for them. It's not on their mind, right? Sweden has had several presentations on prostitution and other things. I just got to say, it's not been a topic, but my understanding is that UN women and the orgs within the UN that are captured by it is because of the funding member states, which are heavily North America, that are pushing the gender ideology.
We're now going on to Amparo Domingo. She is the country contact for Spain for WDI, and the title of Amparo's talk is "What is SOGI or SOGI, and who is the new Council of Europe Commissioner?" And you can expand the title of your talk better than that. Okay, over to you, Amparo.
I'm going to explain to you, Sharon was saying now that at the UN, member states are pushing for the gender ideology. There are some key figures that are being sort of the channels or the instruments to do that. And I'm going to tell you about this figure called UN Independent Expert on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, which is the acronym that Joe was referring, SOGI, which appears in many, many places. As you see, usually this figure is being referred as IE SOGI, and that is the shortest version of this title of this role at the UN. So when you get into the website of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights at the UN, you see the title, as I said, is Independent Expert on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, and you see the logo here. At the lower end says that it's a special procedures, and they mention special rapporteurs, independent experts, and working groups. So as an introduction, I would like to show you what's exactly, what's that exactly. So human rights special procedures are independent people, are members, experts that are being called, and they are called either special rapporteurs, as Alsalem, who Sharon was mentioning in her talk before, but also independent experts. And I'm told that there's a sort of hierarchy that inside the UN, the special rapporteur has a higher status than the independent experts. Also, they can work collectively, and then they would be called working groups, which are the three names that were in the logo that we saw just at the previous slide. So these people are being called to work on a certain specific topic due to their expertise, to their knowledge, what they have done before, to reach a certain level of experience in order to be considered experts. And this is as you know, I usually take snapshots from my sources of information, because sometimes you might think that I'm making things up. These experts, of course, because they are doing a very specialized work and a very sensitive, very delicate work for the UN, they have to be independent, they have to be impartial, honest, and have to have good faith. And in order to preserve that independence, they do not receive any financial remuneration from the UN. So that is supposed to work in favor of that independence, in their opinion, because they do not take money from the UN or any party related to the UN. And they can be appointed for a maximum of 6 years. There's this document that I found at the UN. I'm not an expert. I think this is this is a very simple research looking on the internet, what's happening. And I hope this is quite informative for the women that are new to this subject. So there's this code of conduct that it's public, because UN also wants to have transparency and be relatable. It is published, the code of conduct, and it says that prior to assuming their functions, they have to, in writing, declare solemnly, it is a solemn declaration, that they will perform the duties from a completely impartial, loyal, and conscientious standpoint. And also that their main goal is to protect human rights, and they cannot accept instructions from any other party whatsoever. And this is something that everyone must have signed before getting officially appointed as independent expert or special rapporteur, as this is the case that I'm explaining to you. So this mandate was created in 2016. It's quite recent in the environment or the milieu of the UN. We just heard from Sharon that the special rapporteur on violence against women, it's now 30 years old. Well, this is this independent expert, this role, this mandate was created in 2016. It was for an initial period of 3 years, but it has been renewed and renewed. So now it's on the 3rd renewal from July 22 under the resolution 5010. So this is a snapshot of the document, the resolution adopted by the Human Rights Council on the June 30th, 2016. And the official title of this mandate is Independent Expert on the Protection Against the Violence and Discrimination Based on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. So I'm going to explain briefly this is the current mandate holder. We haven't had the opportunity to hear from him in this role. The things that we have found are related to previous engagement, previous responsibilities he had. For instance, he wrote a book, How to Be a Real Gay. He's from South Africa, and he's the expert since November 1st, 2023. When the previous one finished his appointment. So this is a South African man, gay, that also had a master's degree in anthropology and a PhD from the University of Amsterdam. But also now he's a research scholar and a lecturer at the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs. This is the first expert who was appointed at that initial resolution I just showed you, June 30th, 2016. And this is a Thai man, but who was educated in the United Kingdom. He had his degree in law from Oxford. And this man, the first independent expert the UN appointed, was the co-chairperson of the drafting committee of the Yogyakarta Principles, which are, the responsible for the expansion of the idea that there is that thing called gender identity that no one seems to know what refers to. He was appointed for a period of 3 years, but didn't finish. I don't know the circumstances, but he resigned in the middle of that period. And then Víctor Madrigal Borloz, who we know his actions, of whom we know his actions at this mandate, he was appointed when the previous mandate holder resigned. At his bio, that is public at the UN, there's no mention of his involvement with Yogyakarta Plus Principles in 2017, because he was a signatory of that Yogyakarta Plus 10. And this is a snapshot of his position as the signatory list in Yogyakarta Plus. This is a public knowledge. This is a fact that is in the public knowledge. Is not a secret. He tweeted very proudly from his personal account that the Yogyakarta Plus were published, were out, and he was a part of that. So this is a very public knowledge. But Víctor Madrigal Borloz didn't mention that at his official bio that is published, still published today, if you follow this link, at the Office of the High Commissioner of the Human Rights at the UN. Madrigal Borloz, who has been 6 years the independent expert, thanks to the research of Tish. I have the picture of her Twitter account, so everyone will recognize her. She published at her website, Gender Critical Woman, that she had located 2 different grants granted, sorry for that repetition, by the first Arcos Foundation and then the Human Rights Program at Harvard Law School. They said it's to support the independent experts. Maybe this is because, as we saw before, he was not being paid by the UN while doing that job. So the Arcos Foundation granted him $100,000 for 18 months. And then the Human Rights Program at the Harvard Law School granted him $200,000 for a period of 3 years. The LGBT Alliance filed a formal complaint sent to the President of the Human Rights Council, and it was sent a copy to the UN Secretary General and the UN Deputy Secretary General and many other high officials that are related to this position in the UN system. I have here the beginning of this complaint for you to read. This is public also. It is published at the LGBT Alliance's website. And they said that he had been in breach of his obligations as independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. And they developed this complaint in the following pages. It's very interesting. It's very detailed. And WGGI, they did LGBT Alliance. You all will remember that they opened that complaint for signatures, and WGGI signed that, and also from Spain, Confluencia Movimiento Feminista supported this because he has not taken into consideration the rights of gays and lesbians, homosexual, same-sex attracted people, but of course he has also dismissed the rights of women. The summary, extreme summary of this complaint by the LGBT Alliance is also publicized at the website. And I have highlighted here the synthesis of that. LGBT Alliance stated in their complaint that Mr. Madrigal Borloz urges countries to introduce gender self-ID and champions the activist manifesto known as the Yogyakarta Principles instead of doing his job, and he largely ignores the sexual orientation part of his mandate. He repeatedly insists the gender self-ID poses no risk to the rights of LGBT people or women, despite being supplied with a mountain of evidence to the contrary. And by doing that, he represents the law, falsely asserting that international human rights law requires the introduction of gender self-ID, which is probably, I think, every report, everything that I have read, published or produced by this independent expert, as a sort of conclusion, like it was the natural conclusion after researching and reading and studying a ton of evidences. It's like he reaches that same conclusion over and over and over in every report. He gets to the conclusion that the best policy is always self-ID, which he then tries to push or to misrepresent that as a UN policy or the outcome of the application of instruments of international humans, instruments of international law. The reports and statements that I'm going to very, very briefly tell you about, issued by this office, this mandate, this role by the UN. The first report that is publicized also at the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights website was called Report on Gender Identity. That was 2018. So this must be a publication, something that Madrigal Borloz issued. I haven't found any report issued by the Thai professor, Birgit Muntab-Byrne. There might be, as I said, I'm not an expert, but I haven't found it. And as you see, sexual orientation, which is the first item in the binomial sexual orientation and gender identity, really is missing, and it's nowhere to be seen in this report. This is the first page. I have screenshotted for you the first page, which is really, I don't know how to describe, whether it is confusion, whether it is manipulation of language, because it's impossible to make sense of this. The first assertion is that all persons have some form of gender identity. And please have in mind, this is a document that is publicized, it is public, it's published at the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights of the UN. So this is written in a personal capacity by the independent expert, but it's for everyone to read at the official website of the Office of the High Commission of the Human Rights, as you can see here by the domain. So according to this, it would seem that the UN thinks that we all have some form of gender identity. This is a sort of the new religion, as you know. We all have a soul, and that soul will tell you whether you are male or female, depending on whatever you like to do or how to dress. This is not an exaggeration, what I said about how to dress, because, well, they use this expression, the sex assigned at birth, but this individual experience of gender, which is called the gender identity, includes gender expressions like dress, which is fashion, speech, which is thought in your culture, and mannerisms. So that is supposed to be part of your innate gender identity. He goes on saying that the notion that there is a gender norm, it's based on a preconception But then instead of preconception, goes on to saying that it is a misconception. So in 2 lines, he has changed the meaning of the word. And as misconception, he states that as that human nature is to be classified with reference to male-female binary system on the basis of the sex assigned at birth. And this is a misconception, according to the expert. He says that the misconception is that there's a legitimate societal objective that, as a result, persons adopt the roles, feelings, expressions, and behaviors that are considered inherently masculine and feminism. Well, we feminists do not characterize this as a misconception. We characterize this as sexism, which we oppose, but we don't defend this. So he's mixing objections and statements that really come from very different positions, ideological positions. And here he says that the term trans is used to refer to persons who identify with a different gender than the one they were assigned at birth. In the previous paragraphs, he said that what was assigned at birth was sex, not gender. Gender was an innate feeling, not something they assigned to you. So really it's very, very, very confusing. And he also says that all over the world, there were cultures that recognize genders other than male and female. We don't know exactly what he's referring. Well, he's referring to that hijra and all that, travesti, but that's not a gender or a sex, that's male behaving as what society thinks is more suitable for women. This is a slide that comes from the summary of another report. The previous report was called Gender Identity. This report is called Gender Theory. As you have seen, LGB Alliance is right. He has practically never spoken about sexual orientation. And in the report, this is a summary. This slide I have used before, but I'm still shocked several years after having read it for the first time, because there's this sentence that he understands gender as a supra-biological phenomenon with social implications, which we don't know what it means, but this should not really imply that men should be regarded as women before the law, or that anyone has a right to go to the registry and then change their legal sex or the legal ID or their passport or the driver license. We don't know exactly the meaning, but he's using this very obscure language to do something that is very, very easy to explain. That is, he wants men to be considered women legally. And this is the kind of language that he's using to make appear or make believe people that this is a very complex phenomenon, and this is very complicated, and it is not easily understandable or easily to explain. This is the last consultation that was open. This was the first consultation of the current mandate holder. We haven't seen the result. I guess it will be published in June. I think that's when the 56th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council will take place. And then he will present the report out of the submissions he got when this call was open. It was about protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in relation to the human rights to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. And I will be very curious to know whether he has included what we also heard at the previous experts, previous panelists we had here, when it was mentioned that lesbians were not allowed to have a single-sex space without men. I would think that this is something related to their sexual orientation and their right, human right to freedom of association and assembly. let's see whether that appears in the report that this expert is going to issue during the year. This is not a report. This is just a sort of an open question. There's a side of the website that is called Issues in Focus, and there are different links to different topics. And as with the reports, I haven't seen anything related to same-sex attraction or homosexuality or how you would like to call it, but it's always gender, gender, gender. And maybe there are here the lesbians and gays when he mentions LGBTI or LGBT, but it's not really an issue that is separated from gender identity. There's always the mix, always the mix. The binomial is usually the way to confuse people about this thing. Anyway, because of the new term for me, gender diverse person, which I wasn't sure I had come across before, I had a look. So when clicking on the struggle of trans and gender diverse persons, you find this definition. This gender identity definition is exactly as Yoga Carta, and indeed this footnote, when you hit the footnote, you go to the Yoga Carta principles. So currently, the Office of the Independent Expert Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, they do quote Yoga Carta principles as if it were official from the UN. We know it is not. This is a snapshot is from today or yesterday. So this is really the current situation. And aside from gender identity, he explains that gender diverse, it's used to refer to persons whose gender identity, including the gender expression, is at odds with what is perceived as being the gender norm in a particular context at a particular point in time, which to me is fashion or culture, but it's not a gender identity it's not being diverse. It's not. I don't understand how he could refer to this social mandate as being a part of the innate identity of the people. Also, he includes those who do not place themselves in the male/female binary. Prior, we have seen that they refer to the binary as masculine and feminine. That could be argued because it is made by society. There could be other ways of expressing oneself, but really, as sexes, there is nothing else outside the male-female binary because there's no third sex. So also this doesn't make any sense. And then
Amparo, I'm just going to jump in and say, could you wind up in the next few minutes?
Yeah, it's I think it's my last slide. Or really, I'm finishing. Thank you. Sorry. So trans is used to describe persons who identify with a different sex than the one assigned to them at birth. As we saw in the previous report, it was the gender that was assigned to them. So because of this definition of the gender norm in a particular context at a particular point in time, and because I was a child in the 70s and a teenager in the 80s, this is what came to mind, really. So these men who were men and never claimed to be other than men, really expanded the gender norms or challenged the gender norms or changed the gender norms, whatever you want to call them, but they were just men. Some were gay, some were straight. And this is, as I said before, this is a part of fashion and some avant-garde in fashion, but not in any kind of inner innate identity. And in terms of gender norms, if this is the male norm, the tie and the suit, and these gods also wear suits and some wear ties, but also wear makeup. And here we have the punks that are completely different, addressed completely differently from what other men are, but very similar to what women are also dressing, very, very similar. Are they non-binary? Should punks be added as the P to the ever-expanding acronym as identity? This is, I don't know, an idea. And as an appendix, just what Joe mentioned at the beginning, this is the rapporteur of the Jakarta Principles. He was the one who drafted the initial text that the other experts at that meeting in Indonesia were working on and then published. This man has now just been appointed Commissioner for Human Rights at the Council of Europe. So the current commissioner is still in office. She will end very soon, and when that happens, he will step in and be, for the following years, the Commissioner for Human Rights at the Council of Europe, which affects around 50 countries. So as a summary of my presentation is that sometimes we see information, sometimes we see documents, statements, reports that appear to be the official position of a multilateral organism, of a multinational organism like UN, EU, Council of Europe, but maybe behind that report is the work of trans activists, as this man that I was showing you today. And that's why also there's a lot of confusion about what's official or not official, or what's something that states are compelled to follow, or maybe it's just a recommendation. So this information, I think, is useful for our activism, and that's all that I have today.
We're going now to Hara Dansky. She's the president of WDI US. She's author of The Abolition of Sex and the recently published The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. She's an attorney. And Hara is going to talk to us about Special Rapporteur Alsalem's criticisms of the Biden administration's efforts to redefine sex out of existence under Title IX, which makes some very interesting links about how all of this is interconnected and influences national policy. So thank you for being on, Hara, and over to you.
In case it's of interest, the United States ambassador to the United Nations has expressed unqualified support for the mandate of the independent expert about whom Amparo just educated us. And also relevant to Amparo's presentation is that there's a case currently pending in the federal court system in which the Biden Department of Justice has submitted a brief that states that every person has a gender identity. And that case may go before the Supreme Court. And if it does, we'll see what the Supreme Court thinks about that statement. Okay, so this is on Reem Alsalem, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, having been openly critical of the Biden administration's proposed Title IX rule changes. So most of us know Title IX is a US law that prohibits sex discrimination in education, including in sports. It has very straightforward language and basically just says that educational institutions that receive federal funding cannot unfairly discriminate against women and girls in education. So one of its fiercest proponents was Patsy Mink, a Japanese-American woman born on a sugar plantation in Hawaii. After receiving her law degree, she was unable to find work at a law firm due to rampant sex and race discrimination. However, she eventually won a seat in the House of Representatives, where she was a fierce champion of women's rights. On his very first day of taking office, President Biden signed Executive Order 13988, Preventing and Combating Discrimination on the Basis of Gender Identity or Sexual Orientation. And it's worth just maybe pausing to note, Amparo talked about the independent expert's mandate on discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. The Biden administration has now flipped it and appears openly to prefer protection against gender identity over sexual orientation explicitly. Those of us who had been fighting the fight against gender identity in the US knew how bad the very concept is for women and girls as a sex class, but we weren't quite prepared to be hammered with this executive order on Biden's very first day of taking office. The order required all US federal agencies to rewrite all their rules and regulations to interpret the word sex to include gender identity for literally all purposes under federal administrative law. Throughout the first half of 2021, many agencies, including the US Department of Education, did so. In June of 2021, the US Department of Education issued a notice of interpretation saying that it would interpret the word sex to include gender identity for all Title IX purposes. So in the summer of 2021, 20 states sued the Biden administration, arguing, among other things, that the department's notice of interpretation was procedurally flawed because the department failed to follow applicable federal procedural law in issuing it. The US chapter of WDI, when we were still the Women's Human Rights Campaign, filed a friend of the court brief in that case, agreeing that the notice was procedurally flawed and adding the argument that the notice also discriminated against women and girls on the basis of sex. The judge in that case agreed with the procedural arguments and blocked the department's notice from taking effect in the 20 states that had filed the lawsuit. That's good news for women and girls in those states, but it has also wreaked massive havoc all over the country because the notice is in effect in the 30 states that were not plaintiffs in the lawsuit. By 2022, the Department of Education had figured out that if it was going to succeed in its goal of obliterating women and girls nationally, it was at least going to have to play by the rules. So in July of that year, it issued a notice of proposed rulemaking and invited public comment. That notice also proposed redefining sex to include gender identity for all Title IX purposes, which is obviously bad for women and girls, but at least the department managed to comply with the rules this time. The WDI US chapter created a digital action that allowed signatories to the declaration to submit a critical comment with the click of a button. The department received over 200,000 public comments on the proposed rule, which is more than any other proposed rule in the department's history. The department was supposed to finalize the rule by May of 2023, but it missed its deadline. Then it was supposed to finalize the rule by the end of October 23, but it missed that deadline too. As far as we know, this rule has cleared its next to final hurdle, and the White House could issue the final rule any day. We fully predict that the White House will ignore the demands of the American people and just go ahead to eliminate the sex-based rights of women and girls for all purposes under Title IX. The department issued a somewhat similar proposed rule in April of 2023. Thank you, whoever's wishing me a happy birthday. That proposed rule would redefine sex to include gender identity under some, but not all circumstances, and it's limited to athletics. That's still bad, but it's slightly less bad than the 2022 proposed rule. We have received no information at all about the status of the April 2023 proposed rule. At this time, neither proposed rule has been finalized, but either could be any day. Now, as far as I can recall, it didn't occur to anyone in the US chapter to reach out to Special Rapporteur Alsalem about this, though I could be wrong about that. So we were surprised and delighted when she issued a public statement on December 27th, 2023, that was highly critical of the administration. At that time, her statement focused on the April 2023 proposed rule, and it said the following. She said, "I share the concern expressed by women and girl athletes and women's sports associations, as well as women and girls on sports scholarships, that the proposed Title IX rule changes would have detrimental effects on the participation of biological women and girls in sports, including by denying them the opportunity to compete fairly, resulting in the loss of athletic and scholarship opportunities." She continued, "More importantly, it would lead to the loss of privacy, an increased risk of physical injury, heightened exposure to sexual harassment and voyeurism, as well as a more frequent and accumulated psychological distress due to the loss of privacy and fair and equal sporting and academic opportunities." She said, "If the proposed rule changes are adopted, they would contravene the United States international human rights obligations and commitments concerning the prevention of all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls on the basis of sex." Can I have the next slide, please? And she concluded, the expert has been in contact with the government of the United States of America about these concerns. Now, at the time, we weren't entirely sure exactly what that referred to, but we were thrilled to see the UN Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women and Girls weighing in on this and accusing President Biden of committing an international human rights violation against women and girls. This is the tweet that went out from the UN Office for Special Procedures of the Human Rights Council on the day she issued her statement, in which we were so excited to see. The US chapter then issued a statement thanking her. We said, the US Department of Education is now on notice, not only from countless women across America, but also from the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, that its attempts to obscure the material reality of sex are unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Thank you, Special Rapporteur Alsalem, for taking this important step. Previously, in November 2023, our board secretary, Irene Lawrence, had reached out to Special Rapporteur Alsalem to inform her of the threats and violence that we had experienced during our September 2023 organizational convention in San Francisco, and she responded to express her support. So our next step was to email her our statement thanking her, and she responded to say, "Dear Irene, many thanks for your message. I appreciate it and look forward to being in touch." We tweeted our statement and we were delighted to see that she liked our tweet. But it wasn't until February of this year that we learned that even before issuing the public statement on December 27th of last year, she had sent the Biden administration a private letter on December 21st of last year. At that point, we learned that she was expressing full-on criticism of both the administration's July 2022 attempt to redefine sex out of existence for all Title IX purposes, as well as its April 2023 attempt to redefine sex out of existence only under certain circumstances for Title IX. Her 2021 letter is 11 single space pages long and organizes her concerns into the following categories. So these are the categories under which she organizes her concerns in her December 21st letter to the Biden administration. Potential negative consequences for the ability of women and girls to enjoy their rights free from discrimination based on sex, the right to safety and dignity for women and girls involved in sports, potential negative consequences on the right of women and girls to participate fully and equally in society, and protecting the rights of transgender women and girls. Now, that last category is interesting. Those of us in this fight are accustomed to reading words like transgender women and girls and assuming the speaker is talking about men and boys, in part because our governments and our media have been training us to do so for years now. However, if I'm reading the letter correctly, and I realize I may not be, I think she's actually talking here about women and girls who claim to identify as trans, and that she's expressing concerns about their safety in categories and spaces intended for men and boys. She requested a response from the administration within 60 days and said that if she did not receive one, she would make the letter public. And that's exactly what happened in late February of this year, 60 days after having sent the letter. We assume that's what she meant when she said on December 27th, 2023, that the expert has been in contact with the government of the United States of America about these concerns. We are extremely grateful for Special Rapporteur Alsalem's support as we continue to push back against the Biden administration's assault on the sex-based rights of women and girls. Thanks so much.
We're going to go now to our final speaker. Bernadette Malley is the country contact for UK and the tech wizard on WDI FQT. And is the reason that we're here, because me and Bernadette were sitting meekly having a glass of wine at the pub with some TERFs, UK TERFs, and I was saying, oh, why don't we just do webinars and just talk about these things? And everybody else was going, no, you can't do that, it's not going to work, nobody will come, blah, blah. Bernadette went, yeah, good idea, let's just do it. So thank you very much. We've been going for nearly 5 years, and it's thanks to you, your positive support. Right, Bernadette.
Yes.
Is going to do news from the NGO CSW forum. So over to you, Bernadette.
CSW 68 is going on at the moment, and this is kind of the end of a reasonably long process. It starts I kind of thinking about a month or so for like next year. So NGOs and everyone gather, and at the end of it, there's a conference, and this is it. This is the conference. The title, the kind of point of this conference, the perspective that they've put on it, I've put it here on this PowerPoint. And as you can see, it's immensely wordy. Accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. Quite a wordy title for it. There were some other titles as well, but this was the main one that they put forward for CSW 68. I'm going to put this PowerPoint on the because I've got loads of links, and so if I put this PowerPoint, we just put it underneath the when it comes out, the video comes out, you can click on all these, but I won't go through it. But this is kind of, I totally took this from the video that I've got at the top there, and that is actually at the point of this particular set of slides, so you don't have to go all the way through it. And that's quite a good in there. There's you can see that purple. I've got my massive. This here is quite a good website to explain what CSW is, how it came about, and everything. So I stuck that one in there. So I'm going to mainly just have a quick chat with you about what's online, what you can have a look at, what's going on at this particular conference. So there's two sides to it. There's the actual side of the member states getting together, and then there's the NGO side. And I've put these two colors either side of this particular diagram because you can see that if you end up in a website and most of the colors are orange, you're on pretty much the official site. If you end up somewhere where most of them are blue, then you're on the NGO site, and it kind of will help you work out what you're reading. The actual official site, if you go into it, it'll look like this. And you can actually watch the videos. You can, as I say, you'll be able to click on this here. I keep pointing to it, but I should be using my cursor. Click on this link here. It'll take you into this website. Scroll down a bit, and you can scroll along these dates. And some of them have watch on them, and you'll go into a video. And also, they have actually got, like most parliaments, they've got an actual TV kind of channel that you can have a look at what's live going on at the moment. So you can also have, they've got a little snapshot of what is CSW, and then so this is the official, the member states. This is what they'll be doing. This is their timetable, and then you can go in and you can also have a look at the documents that they're going to be looking at. So these are all the official documents that will be there. I mean, it's pretty much like any meeting. They talk about what they're going to talk about. They tell you all the people that they've talked to that they're going to talk about, and then they tell you what they are going to do. But actually in the meeting, I don't really think they do anything. These statements here are the ones that have all been put forward by the NGOs. And they have to be, there's a very long acronym for it, but they have to be official NGOs, and then you can submit a statement to the UN, and they can put it up on their website here. I had a quick look at them. It's quite interesting if you go in. This particular, again, I'm pointing, this is the United Nations Digital Library System. It's really good. You can click on there and put in any of these documents or any, I picked out all of the English ones, and I used that then to find out all documents from CSW that had gender identity in them somewhere. So that's a really good little thing to know about, to use. So we're going to now go into the NGO side. So if you click on the links here, you'll be in the blue. Again, there's a website, scroll down through. Now you can register, or you can just use the website. You can go into the interactive handbook. You can use the YouTube, and you can register for Zoom, you don't actually have to go into their portal. You don't have to register with them to actually, obviously you have to register to use the Zoom, but you just need an email for that. So you don't actually have to register for the NGO portal, but I will show you how to do that in a minute, and I did it today. So I just thought before, at the end of when I show you how to get into the portal, I've got to click a link to go into a website. So I was going to put this couple of slides at the end, but I thought I'd put it in the middle because I don't know if I'll be able to get back here. When I was watching all of the videos about what's going on, I did watch this one, and it was really interesting. And they were talking about the problems of women experiencing their periods across different countries. And there was a woman from Papua New Guinea, and she was talking about the fact that, you know, they don't even have shops to buy the products that you could use. And she was talking about pushing out the shops, pushing out that information. So you've got all of these women talking about the fact that women do not have access to period products. They do not have the knowledge that there are period products. And in that, they're talking about menstruators. So they're saying menstruators, and this was one here, this is an example. This problem is aggravated because we saw that in Pakistan, in the floods, there were a lot of menstruators who had to use dirty sheets of clothing. And so you've got them using this language, which, and I wondered if it was because when it went to the Q&A and they weren't kind of reading off their script and they were doing the language that they're used to doing in all of their PowerPoint presentations and things, they did talk about women. And occasionally they corrected themselves as well. And I wondered if it was just moving to a separate language. You know, the English probably isn't their first language. So they're going to this language. They've been told that this is how you say it. And when, as an English speaker, my first language is English. When I hear menstruator, I have a physical reaction to being called a menstruator. And I just wonder if maybe a lot of women who have English not as their first language I wonder if these women do not appreciate what they're saying. So these women who were talking about really important issues didn't realize when they were articulating it how demeaning their language actually was to English speakers. And I wonder if that's just a language thing that they haven't realized, and they just need to be told. And if maybe they did it in their own language and called the women menstruators or something else, maybe they might realize how awful it sounds. But I wonder if a lot of these women don't realize how awful it all sounds because it's not their first language. Anyway, that was just a thought I had as I was listening through to these really amazing women doing great work, but calling us all menstruators. Then I went down a total rabbit hole, which I've just kind of put in here, and it goes back to the fact of gender through finance and institutions. And also I was looking at the women who are on the UN Women UK, and one of them, she was linked to this Unstereotype Alliance. And I did have a quick look at it, but obviously I was doing this, but you just can go down so many rabbit holes. But I do recommend women actually do look at this Unstereotype Alliance. They're basically going out to companies to tell them that their advertising should not be stereotypical. But I think in doing that, they are pushing gender identity as a way of not being in a stereotype instead of actually properly doing the analysis. And there did seem to be a crossover between it, but I'll just leave that there. I just really wanted it to put it here and have some brilliant women then analyze this. I think it's been taken over. Anyway, back to the forum. So you can go into the forum, and as I say, I did this morning. So you can, I was just going on to Zoom calls before, but I just want, so you can do it. You basically go into this website, you go on here, You register, put in your details, you get a thank you, an email comes through, then you click this link here, go back into that screen, and this time you click login. You go into login, you just put your email, you don't have to put in a password, there is no password. You click login and you go to this screen here. And now this is my last slide, so let's see if this works. Did it work? No, of course it didn't. So I'm going to stop sharing and re-share this screen. Hold on a moment. There you go. So you go to this screen and then you literally click on this. It's flashing at you. And look, this is where all the money's gone. Woo. And we're in the forum. So you can go to the exhibition booths. There's the handbooks. There's an information desk. Look at all that. Aren't we really glad that we've got this? And then you can listen to the women talking about the fact that they don't have any sanitary products. Just the juxtaposition of the whole thing really did kind of get to me. And but go in, have a look. There are some conversation circles which you can go and have a look at and register. And I really would recommend that that you do, because I think there might be questions that we can do. But most of this kind of online stuff is next week, so it's worth doing. You can probably listen into things that were happening before, and it'd be great if there are some other language women go in and push our ideas and remind them where they actually should be doing their work. I have to say, I don't know, I do hear an awful lot of congratulation language when I listen to these and just think, yeah, do you just spend your life wandering around being congratulated that you're on these boards rather than actually doing any work? Anyway, that's it. Please go for it.